The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and seeping through the cracks in my remote cabin. Winter in these mountains wasn't just harsh, it was merciless. At 62, I had learned to respect its power, to prepare for its fury, and to cherish the warmth of my fire on nights like this. I settled into my worn-out recliner, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, letting the crackling flames chase away the cold that had settled into my bones. Outside, the snow piled higher, swallowing the landscape in an unforgiving white abyss. Then I heard it. Faint at first, barely distinguishable over the storm. The soft, repetitive scratch of nails against wood. My pulse quickened. Living alone, you learn to dismiss a lot of sounds, but something about this was different. I set my mug down and listened. A moment later, a low, pitiful whine drifted through the door, raw with desperation. My heart clenched. Pushing myself up, I approached cautiously. When I pulled the door open, the sight stole my breath. A German shepherd stood there, covered in snow, trembling violently. His eyes, filled with fear and exhaustion, locked onto mine. And then he collapsed. I barely had time to react before the dog crumpled onto the frozen porch. "Oh God," I breathed, dropping to my knees. His body was ice cold, his fur matted with snow and dirt. I hesitated only a second before scooping him into my arms, wincing at how little he weighed. He let out a weak whimper, barely clinging to consciousness. "Hang on, buddy," I murmured, kicking the door shut behind me as I carried him toward the fire. The warmth hit us like a wave, but he didn't react. I grabbed an old blanket, wrapping it around his shivering body, then ran to the kitchen, filling a bowl with lukewarm water. Kneeling beside him, I dipped my fingers into the water and gently rubbed them against his ears, his paws, anywhere I could warm him up. For a terrifying moment, he didn't move. Then a slight twitch of his ear, a slow, shallow breath. Relief flooded through me. But just as I let myself hope, a sound cut through the cabin, a faint scratching at the door. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. Not again. I froze. The first dog, Ranger, I decided then and there, was still barely hanging on, his breathing shallow, his body limp in the blanket I had wrapped around him. Yet the scratching at the door came again, insistent but weak, like someone, or something, was desperate to get in. My hands trembled as I stood, every nerve on edge. This was no coincidence. I crept toward the door, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The storm had eased just enough for the outside world to take shape. Dark silhouettes of trees, drifts of snow piled against the porch. I swallowed hard and cracked the door open, bracing for whatever was waiting. Another German shepherd, smaller, younger, just as frail. Snow clung to his fur, his ribs sharp beneath his thin coat. His dark eyes met mine with the same desperate plea I had seen in Rangers only moments before. My stomach twisted. "Oh no," I whispered. He whimpered, taking an unsteady step forward before collapsing onto the porch. Just like Ranger had. I didn't hesitate this time. I scooped him up, kicking the door shut behind me. Two dogs, both in critical condition, both appearing at my doorstep in the dead of night. This wasn't an accident. Something wasn't right. Two German shepherds, both battered by the storm, both barely clinging to life, had appeared at my doorstep within hours of each other. That couldn't be a coincidence. I placed the younger dog beside Ranger, wrapping him in another blanket. His tiny body trembled, but he nestled against the older dog like they had always known each other. A lump formed in my throat. Were they family? Had they survived something together? My gut told me they had been through hell. I stood rubbing a hand over my face, trying to make sense of it all. Then a thought struck me like ice water down my spine. Where had they come from? I rushed to the door, yanking it open and stepping onto the porch. The wind had died down, but the cold still sliced through me. I scanned the snow, searching for tracks. My breath hitched. There they were, paw prints leading from the woods. But they weren't alone. My stomach twisted into a knot. A third set of tracks. Bigger, deeper, human. Someone had been out there with them, and they had left them behind. But why? And where were they now? I followed the tracks through the snow, each step heavier than the last. The human footprints were erratic, stumbling as if whoever had left them was disoriented, lost, or running. My heart pounded in my chest. Whoever had abandoned these dogs didn't just leave them behind. They had been forced to leave them. The tracks twisted in every direction, like someone had been desperately trying to shake a pursuit. But there was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no signs of a fight. Then I stumbled into a small clearing. My breath caught in my throat. The human tracks stopped abruptly. The snow here was disturbed, scuffed, trampled, as if something had happened here. My stomach turned. There had been a struggle, but no bodies, no blood. Nothing but the cold, stark silence of the forest. As I bent to inspect the disturbed snow, my fingers brushed against something. Cold, metal. I pulled it free, heart racing, and stared in disbelief. It was a leash. The frayed edges were unmistakable. These dogs had been tied up here. They had escaped. A low growl broke my thoughts. Ranger stood behind me, tense, his eyes fixed on something beyond the trees. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. We weren't alone. Ranger's growl sent a chill down my spine, colder than the wind cutting through the trees. I swallowed hard and slowly turned, my breath hitching as my eyes scanned the forest's dark edge. At first, I saw nothing but the silent stretch of trees, their branches heavy with snow. Then movement, a shadow shifting between the trunks. My pulse hammered. Someone was watching us. The figure moved closer, slow and deliberate. The crunch of boots on snow echoed in the stillness. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I stood my ground, gripping the frayed leash in my hand like a lifeline. The shepherd beside me tensed, his ears flat, his body rigid. He was ready to fight. Then the figure stepped into the clearing. A man, mid-40s, weathered face, eyes sharp and calculating. A deep scar ran from his jaw to his temple. His gaze flicked from me to Ranger, then to the leash in my grip. Something dark flashed in his expression. "That doesn't belong to you," he said, voice low and rough. I clenched my jaw, my knuckles white around the leash. "Neither do those dogs." His lips curled into a slow, menacing smirk. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Ranger didn't wait for me to answer. With a deep growl, he lunged forward, his bark sharp and relentless. The man stumbled back, the smirk fading as fear flashed across his face. He hadn't expected a fight. "Call your dog back," he barked, his voice strained. "No way," I shot back, my own fear frozen into something else. Anger. Ranger stood firm, his body tense, his eyes locked on the man as if he knew exactly who he was. I did too. He was the reason Ranger had scars on his body, the despair in his puppy's eyes. He was the reason they almost died in that storm. I took a step closer, gripping the frayed leash. "You hurt them. You locked them in those cages." My voice was calm now, full of anger. "Why?" The man suddenly exhaled, his eyes darting toward the trees as if he were calculating his escape. "You don't understand." "No, you don't," I interrupted. "I have proof. This chain, that book in the shed. The police will have it soon." His face twisted into something ugly. Then, without another word, he turned and dashed into the woods. Ranger lunged as if to chase him, but I grabbed him by the collar. "Let him go," I whispered, my chest heaving, because now I had everything I needed to take him down. I stood there, my breath clouding in the cold air, my heart pounding in my chest. The man had disappeared into the forest, but his shadow still lingered in my mind. He had left Ranger and the pup to die in that storm. He had locked them in cages, treated them like property, but they had fought, survived, and somehow made their way to me. That wasn't luck. That was resilience. That was fate. Ranger turned to me, his deep brown eyes searching mine. He had been through so much, pain, fear, betrayal, but he still stood by my side. The younger dog, curled up near my feet, let out a soft whimper, pressing closer to Ranger for comfort. They weren't just strays, they were warriors, and now they were mine. As the sun crept over the horizon, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't letting them go. They deserved warmth, safety, love, a home. If you believe every animal deserves a second chance, share this story. Comment below. Have you ever rescued an animal in need? Let's spread awareness, fight for those who can't speak, and make the world a little kinder, one rescue at a time.